You ever walk out of the office, sit in your car, and just exhale? Not from the workload, not because the day was hectic, but because something felt off. Someone felt off. A coworker smiled at you, laughed at your jokes, maybe even said they had your back. But deep down, you sensed it. The shift in energy, the faint sting of being dismissed, the invisible weight of something you can't quite name. You go home, replay the day in your mind. That moment in the meeting when your idea got talked over, the weird look when you got praised, the silence when you needed support. And slowly, a question creeps in. Am I imagining this, or is someone quietly working against me? Carl Jung believed the most dangerous forms of sabotage don't come from enemies, they come from people who think they're on your side. Until you make the unconscious conscious, he wrote, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. In the workplace, that unconscious force often wears a name badge, smiles in the hallway, nods in meetings, but behind the surface, it's slowly unraveling your confidence, your clarity, and your progress. This isn't about toxic bosses or office gossip. This is deeper. This is about the 5 types of coworkers, Carl Jung would say, are not just difficult, but psychologically dangerous. They don't raise their voice. They don't throw tantrums. They sabotage in ways that leave no fingerprints, through charm, through silence, through calculated praise that cuts. So if you've ever left work feeling emotionally bruised but couldn't explain why, if you've questioned yourself more than the people around you, it's time to see what's really happening. Because once we uncover these 5 quiet saboteurs, your workplace will never feel the same again. Let's start by understanding the hidden psychology that makes them so hard to see. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the unconscious side of our personality. It holds all the parts of ourselves we try to suppress: envy, insecurity, resentment, selfish ambition. The shadow isn't evil, it's human, but left unchecked, it drives our behavior in ways we don't realize, especially in the workplace. And here's where it gets real. Most people have no idea they're being led by their shadow. They act out their insecurities without ever naming them. They feel threatened by your strengths but wrap it in compliments. They crave validation but hide it under teamwork. And when someone refuses to face their own shadow, they project it onto others. That others could be you. Ever had a colleague who always forgets to CC you on important emails, then claims it was a mistake? Or someone who seems supportive but always finds a way to center themselves in your success? That's not just office politics, that's shadow behavior. They're acting out something unresolved inside them, using you as the screen. Jung once wrote, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And in modern offices, this avoidance shows up as strategic silence, forced friendliness, or praise that feels just a little too sharp. The hardest part, these co-workers are rarely aggressive. They're often likable, maybe even charismatic. That's why you second-guess yourself, because how can someone so pleasant make you feel so small? This is why Jung's teachings are still painfully relevant today. We live in an age of performative kindness, where professionalism can be a mask for competition, and emotional manipulation hides behind smiling eyes. It's not enough to watch what people say. You have to feel how they make you feel. And now that you understand the shadow and how it plays out in quiet sabotage, let's talk about the first type of coworker you need to watch out for. Not the loud one, not the dramatic one, but the one who never speaks up when it counts. The passive saboteur. The passive saboteur doesn't argue with you. They don't gossip about you. In fact, on the surface, they might seem like the easiest person to work with. They smile in meetings. They nod when you talk. They may even compliment your work in private. But when the moment comes to support you publicly, when your idea is being questioned or when credit is being handed out, they vanish. This is the coworker who stays silent when your project is on the line, the one who agrees with you behind closed doors but offers no support when it actually matters. And in many cases, their inaction speaks louder than direct sabotage ever could. Think about it. Have you ever been in a meeting where you proposed a bold idea and the room went quiet? You scanned the table for support, maybe locked eyes with someone who had praised your idea earlier, but they looked away, said nothing. You stood alone. That moment, that's passive sabotage. They didn't betray you with words, they did it with silence. Carl Jung believed that passivity is often the result of unresolved fear, fear of conflict, fear of judgment, fear of not being liked. And in the modern workplace, that fear often takes the shape of avoidance. But avoidance is not neutral, it has consequences. The passive saboteur tells themselves they're staying out of it or not picking sides, but the moment they withhold their voice, they've already chosen a side, and it's not yours. What makes this type so damaging is that they maintain a friendly rapport. You don't suspect them because they're not overtly hostile. You might even confide in them, but when it counts, you're alone. Jung would say this person is projecting their own fear of inadequacy onto you. By not speaking up, they preserve their own image while quietly letting you take the fall. It's self-protection disguised as neutrality. Ask yourself, who's the person at work who never causes trouble but never stands with you either? Who smiles in the hallway but never vouches for you in the boardroom? That's your passive saboteur. And if they stay in your circle unchecked, they won't just erode your confidence. They'll slowly convince you that maybe your ideas weren't good enough, that maybe you are alone. Let's move to the next type. The one who does speak up, sometimes too much, but always with a smile that feels just a little too sweet. The overly nice manipulator. This is where things get tricky because the overly nice manipulator doesn't look like a problem. In fact, they might be your favorite coworker at first. They compliment your work, bring you coffee, laugh at your jokes, even when they're not that funny. But slowly, you begin to notice something subtle, unsettling. They always seem to be one step ahead of you, don't they? Not because they're better at the job, but because they're better at positioning. You share an idea with them casually, and days later, they float it in a meeting before you get the chance. They offer to help with a project, but when the recognition rolls around, they're the one forwarding the final version to the boss. Their name is always right there, attached to your efforts, like a shadow that refuses to move on its own. And what makes it worse, they do it with a tone that's impossible to call out without sounding petty, because everything they do appears generous, supportive, friendly. Carl Jung would say, this type is the embodiment of the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted. But when that persona is used as a tool to control perception, it becomes manipulative. The overly nice manipulator hides their ambition behind kindness. They avoid direct conflict but engage in psychological games. Their compliments are currency, their favors are investments, and you are the return. Have you ever felt indebted to someone at work? Not because they saved your job, but because they were always just so nice that you couldn't confront them without doubting yourself. That's not an accident. That's the trap. One moment, you think you have a strong ally. The next, you're watching them take credit, take space, and take your influence without ever raising their voice. It leaves you confused, anxious, wondering if you are the one misreading things. But you're not. Jung believed that when we refuse to acknowledge our own hunger for power, it leaks out sideways, through manipulation masked as charm, through support that feels more like control. The overly nice manipulator isn't just helpful, they're strategic. Their kindness has conditions, and by the time you realize it, you're already tangled in it. So ask yourself, who's the coworker that always seems to show up at just the right time? Who offers to help, but somehow always walks away with more visibility, more credit, or more influence than they started with? That's not generosity, that's choreography. Now let's talk about someone even more polished, someone whose skill is undeniable, but whose subtle cuts leave lasting bruises. This is the competent underminer, and they're the hardest to challenge because, truthfully, they're good at what they do, maybe even great. They deliver results, they're articulate, they win the room. So when they correct you in a meeting, it doesn't feel like sabotage, it feels like leadership. When they clarify something you said, it sounds like they're helping the team. But over time, their pattern becomes clear. You leave interactions with them feeling just a little smaller, a little less confident, a little erased. Jung warned that when people haven't reconciled their own fear of inadequacy, they often overcompensate through control. The competent underminer isn't necessarily out to destroy you, but they're deeply invested in maintaining their image as the smartest, most valuable person in the room, and your growth threatens that. They don't shout, they subtly reframe. Imagine you're presenting a solution and they say, "That's a good start, but what if we look at it this way?" Their tone is polite, their words are professional, but what they've just done is reposition the spotlight off you onto them. Sound familiar? Have you ever worked with someone who always finds a way to add value to your ideas, but rarely lets yours stand on their own? Who wraps critique in professionalism, but their words always seem to land just below your ribs? That's not collaboration, that's intellectual one-upmanship. Jung believed this kind of behavior is often rooted in shadow projection. When someone can't tolerate the idea of not being the best, they begin to chip away at others who threaten their position. And instead of celebrating your competence, they quietly compete with it. The modern workplace praises competence, and rightly so. But when competence is combined with insecurity, it creates a person who constantly needs to prove their superiority. And the easiest way to do that is by subtly reducing yours. Here's the real question. Are you constantly second-guessing yourself after meetings with someone who always seems helpful? Do you feel like your ideas are only taken seriously when they pass through someone else's filter? That's not mentorship, that's silent sabotage. Because being good at your job doesn't give someone the right to shrink others in the process. Now, let's move to a different kind of threat. Not the one who outshines you, but the one who mirrors you quietly, strategically, until there's barely a difference between your ideas and theirs. This is the mark of the invisible competitor, the coworker who isn't flashy, isn't loud, and never openly challenges you. In fact, they seem like they're just trying to learn. They observe you, ask questions, nod thoughtfully. They follow your methods, echo your suggestions, and even seem inspired by your style of work. At first, it feels flattering. They admire your work. They want to grow. You may even mentor them, believing you're helping someone rise. But over time, you notice something odd. Your ideas show up in their emails, your phrases in their conversations, your work ethic mirrored in theirs, but with just enough of a tweak to make it their own. They don't challenge you, they replicate you. Jung would call this an unconscious identification with the other, a psychological merging. This happens when a person hasn't fully developed their own inner structure, so instead they borrow someone else's. But this isn't just admiration, it's quiet competition disguised as closeness. And in today's workplace culture, where originality is praised and recognition is currency, this type of sabotage is easy to miss because they're not stealing. They're adopting, and adoption isn't illegal, but it is invasive when it starts erasing your identity. Have you ever noticed a colleague who started dressing like you, using your catchphrases, or pitching ideas you've casually shared over lunch as if they were their own? Ever felt your creative space slowly invaded by someone who's always nearby, always watching, always just trying to learn? That's not collaboration, that's quiet duplication with a competitive edge. And here's where it gets dangerous. The invisible competitor often wins. Why? Because they're likable, non-threatening. They fly under the radar. So while you're busy doing the work, they're busy shaping perception, turning your influence into their advantage. Jung believed that what we fail to develop within ourselves, we often seek to absorb from others. But in a professional setting, that absorption can come at the cost of your clarity, your confidence, and your unique voice. So ask yourself, who's the coworker that always seems just a step behind you, but never too far? Who's always inspired by you, but somehow ends up one step ahead in visibility or recognition? That's not coincidence, that's strategic reflection. And over time, it blurs the line between who you are and who they're pretending to be. But now, let's shift to a very different kind of saboteur, one who isn't subtle, one who thrives on emotion, chaos, and attention, and somehow always pulls you into it. This is the drama magnet, the coworker who seems to be caught in a never-ending storm. Something is always wrong. always urgent, always dramatic, and whether you realize it or not, you're often dragged into their emotional orbit. At first, it feels like they're just dealing with a lot. Maybe they're venting about another department, or they're upset over how the manager spoke to them, or there's a rumor going around, and somehow they're at the center of it again. You want to be compassionate. You listen, you nod, you try to help. But slowly, their problems become your distraction. Carl Jung taught that people who don't confront their inner chaos often act it out in the world around them. The drama magnet doesn't just experience emotional turmoil, they generate it. Not always intentionally, but consistently. They can't find peace unless something is wrong, and if nothing is wrong, they'll create it. You've probably met this person. They always seem like the victim. They rarely take responsibility. Every disagreement is an attack. Every bit of feedback is a betrayal. And somehow they always have an audience. And here's where the sabotage happens. While you're caught up helping them, defending them, or clarifying misunderstandings they've created, you're losing time. You're losing focus. You're being subtly repositioned as an accessory to their instability. Have you ever had a colleague who pulled you aside just to vent, and the next thing you know, your name is part of an HR conversation, or someone who shared something in confidence, only for it to mysteriously spread across the office? That's not venting. That's weaponized emotion. Jung believed that unresolved emotional wounds become contagious, and the drama magnet walks through the workplace like an open wound, leaking stress, confusion, and conflict everywhere they go. And if you're not careful, you'll absorb it, carry it, and get blamed for it. The worst part, drama magnets often genuinely believe they're being wronged. That's why they're so convincing. But their self-narrative leaves no room for accountability. And when you become part of their story, you're no longer seen as a person. You're a character in their chaos. So ask yourself, who in your workplace always has something going on, but nothing ever changes? Who drains your mental energy, blurs boundaries, and always seems to be in some kind of emotional emergency? That's not your responsibility. That's someone else's shadow trying to live in your space. And now that we've seen all 5 types, it's time to turn the focus inward, not to blame yourself, but to ask the most important question. Why do we allow these people so close in the first place? The answer isn't weakness. It's not ignorance. It's usually something deeper and more personal. We let these patterns linger because, in some way, they mirror our own inner dynamics. And just like Jung warned, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Think about it. Why do you tolerate the passive saboteur? Maybe because you avoid conflict too. Why do you keep trusting the overly nice manipulator? Maybe because a part of you craves external approval. Why does the competent underminer get under your skin? Maybe because you doubt your own expertise more than you admit. We don't just attract these people. We often accommodate them because they confirm old stories we tell ourselves. If deep down you don't believe your voice matters, you won't notice when someone else erases it. If you've learned to equate kindness with safety, you'll fall for charm over and over again. And if you've grown up around emotional instability, you might mistake chaos for connection. Jung believed that we project our unconscious beliefs onto the people around us. So the coworker who constantly drains you might also be reflecting the part of you that believes you must fix things to be valuable. The one who steals your spotlight might echo your own discomfort with being fully seen. This isn't about blaming yourself, it's about reclaiming awareness, because once you see the pattern, you're no longer at its mercy. You begin to set boundaries. You stop over-explaining. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable. You stop calling sabotage teamwork. So let me ask you directly, what do you keep excusing in others because it's easier than facing what it triggers in you? What's the cost of staying in proximity to people who quietly chip away at your energy, your clarity, your confidence? You deserve more than survival at work. You deserve sovereignty. And that begins with clarity about who's around you, how they move, and what you allow in your emotional space. Once you recognize these 5 types, the passive saboteur, the overly nice manipulator, the competent underminer, the invisible competitor, and the drama magnet, you stop taking their behavior personally, and more importantly, you stop internalizing it. You don't need to confront everyone. You don't need to start office wars, but you do need to adjust your boundaries. You start responding, not reacting. You document more. You protect your energy like it's part of your paycheck, because it is. Here's what that looks like in real life. You stop oversharing with people who always find a way to repurpose your ideas. You stop seeking validation from those who only praise you when it benefits them. You stop shrinking when someone smart tries to make you feel small. And when drama walks into the room looking for a co-star, you don't audition. Carl Jung said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." Once you've done your own shadow work, you stop being baited by theirs. You become emotionally unshakable, professionally grounded, and psychologically free. But here's the hard truth. Most people will never do this work. They'll keep playing roles, keep wearing masks, keep sabotaging, quietly, skillfully, invisibly. That's why you have to be the one who sees through it. So let me ask you, which of these 5 types have you experienced in your workplace? Have you ever caught yourself playing one of these roles too? And more importantly, what will you now do differently? Drop your answers in the comments. I want to hear your story. Let's help each other see clearly and move wisely, because awareness shared is power multiplied. And if this video helped you put language to something you felt for years but couldn't explain, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who might need the same clarity. Because when you name the pattern, you break the grip. And once you break the grip, you get your power back. You were never overreacting. You were just finally seeing it for what it was. And now you're ready to move differently. Stay sharp, stay grounded, and above all, protect your peace.